today, and thank you for your participation. As it is the custom of our committee, your entire statements will be made part of the record, and when you're recognized, you may proceed. We ask you to try to summarize your statements in about 5 minutes. Today's hearing will examine the workforce challenge that our nation is facing, especially with regards to how it is holding back the prosperity and growth of America's small businesses. Small businesses employ nearly half of America's private sector workforce, and they are the driving force of innovation and growth in our economy. However, the deck is stacked against them in the competition for strong workers because they lack the resources and capital to offer wages and benefits that compete with larger companies. They have limited access to training and apprenticeships programs, and they often require in-person work at time when many workers want flexibility. These historical challenges have been made worse by what economists are calling the Great Reshuffle. In February of this year, for example, 4.4 million workers quit their jobs, but more than half of those workers went on to find better jobs or an entirely different field of work. Small businesses are not only facing difficulties in attracting workers, but they also struggle to keep them, which is a further draw on the finite amount of time and capital that small business owners have. A study conducted by the U.S. Chamber Foundation found that high employee turnover costs small businesses as much as $3 billion per year. Those are resources that could be put into growth and innovation to boost our economy. If small businesses cannot find the workers they need, they cannot grow. According to the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Voices report, 97% of survey respondents reported that difficulty hiring was affecting their bottom line, a 17-point increase from September of 2021. Congress has a duty to our small businesses to support them as they confront these challenges, because our economy can only go as far as our small businesses can take us. So our goal today is to explore the causes of these workforce challenges, the effects of these challenges, and solutions such as investing in workforce training, leveling the playing field between larger companies and small businesses regarding benefits employees receive, and increasing the size of our workforce. Unlocking the potential of the current workforce through job training is one way to help meet the needs of small businesses. As we know, a 4-year degree is not a requirement for every career path, and there are many highly skilled occupations that are better served by an apprenticeship or similar model. There's already a model for these kinds of partnerships, and many community colleges in Maryland, including Prince George's Community College, have earned a national reputation for their apprenticeship programs. However, these programs can be difficult for small businesses to access, so we must take a hard look at how to connect these programs to small businesses. President Biden's American Rescue Plan also provides a model for how the federal government can work with state and local governments to deliver job training resources to the communities that need it the most. In Baltimore, for example, the city will invest $3.8 million in ARPA funds to provide critical workforce development training to residents, including summer jobs for young people and occupational training in high-demand fields. For small business to grow, we must level the playing field between larger companies and small businesses regarding benefits offered, such as paid leave. In Maryland, Democrats in the Maryland General Assembly recently passed legislation to provide 12 weeks of job-protected paid leave to the employees of any organization with more than 15 employees. The law requires the state to establish an insurance program funded by contributions from employers and employees, including sole proprietors. The program will allow workers to take 12 weeks of paid leave for any family or medical emergency and could help small businesses compete with larger companies for employees. As a former Speaker of the House of Maryland, I know that our state houses nationwide are the laboratories of democracy. I will be following the implementation of this law closely, and I'm hopeful that it could serve as a model for how the federal government can assist small businesses combat these workforce challenges. We must also access how we can increase the overall size of our workforce through innovative policies. Unfortunately, due to the Trump administration's immigration policies, We now have some catching up to do. Between 2016 and 2020, annual immigration to the United States was cut in half, which robbed our economy of more than 2 million additional workers today had immigration kept pace with the 2016 levels. The effects of our immigration labor shortages are acutely felt on Maryland's Eastern Shore, which is reliant on workers for the H-2B visa programs during busy crabbing season. The prolonged H-2B visa shortage does not only threaten individual businesses, but entire communities in my home state. By evaluating how to empower immigrants to participate in the workforce, Congress can make it easier for small businesses to find workers and easier for workers to immigrate to America. We can also increase the size of our workforce by investing in returning citizens. Nearly 600,000 Americans are released from prison annually, and despite evidence showing that they make excellent, loyal employees, they're often not included in the workforce development policies and programs that can equip them with the skills they need to succeed in the workforce. Investing in training returning citizens would not only help provide stable employment opportunities for them, but also help small businesses looking for workers. If the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us anything, it is this: the problems that small businesses face are difficult, but not intractable, and addressing them will take focused, intentional, and concerted effort, but they are not insurmountable. The pandemic also confirmed that solving these challenges require a multifaceted approach because there is no single solution. So I'm looking forward to hearing more from our witnesses about steps Congress can take to address all aspects of our nation's workforce challenges to unleash the growth potential of small businesses in the immediate and long-term needs. With that, I recognize my distinguished ranking member for his opening comments, Senator Paul.
Small businesses are struggling under the heavy burden of regulation and taxes. For the last several years, government policies at the federal, state, and local level have subjected our Main Street businesses to restriction after restriction. These onerous regulations, coupled with $6 trillion in government spending, have thrown the economy into a freefall. First, it was the lockdowns. Government forced small businesses to close indefinitely. Then, when they were finally allowed to reopen, they were saddled with capacity restrictions, mask mandates, and vaccine requirements for customers. While these government dictates did nothing to change the trajectory of the virus, they forcibly closed nearly 10 million small businesses, many permanently. But government's so-called solutions didn't stop at public health. Congress doled out trillions of dollars in taxpayer money. The Fed ran the printer 24/7. And government paid people who decided they did not want to work nearly $800 billion from March 2020 to July 2021. It should be no surprise to anybody that the labor force participation is at its lowest point since the Carter administration. Despite countless warnings, Congress poured even more gasoline on the fire. Even economists like Larry Summers and Jason Furman, who worked for Democrat administrations, agree President Biden's $1.9 trillion so-called rescue plan was too large and has caused the rampant inflation we are now encountering. Only now, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, who refuses to testify before this committee, admits she was wrong in calling inflation a small and manageable problem. If she had not been deliberately blind to the predictable result of unrestrained, reckless spending, we might have avoided the economic pain the Biden administration inflicted on every American family. And to add insult to injury, President Biden's anti-domestic energy policies have created $5 to $7 per gallon gas prices, which have roughly doubled since he took office. No matter how many times the Biden administration blames the war in Ukraine or so-called greedy corporations, the truth remains. Inflation comes from the Federal Reserve creating money to buy the exploding U.S. debt. One would think, in the face of such profound failure, politicians in Washington would show some humility. One would think they would consider the possibility they don't know economics better than economists or business better than the small business owners of America. Maybe, just maybe, problems created by excessive government spending and intervention can't be solved by more government spending and intervention. We cannot look to the same people who created this problem for a solution. Those who think small businesses are telling us they want more government spending on ineffective federal job training programs are not paying attention. What small businesses need is freedom. The free enterprise system has created more wealth and prosperity than any government program ever could. Let's let small business owners do what they do best without government getting in the way.
Thank you, Senator Paul. We'll now go to our witnesses. We'll start with Dr. Annalise Cougar, who is a fellow at the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program at Brookings Institution. Her work as a fellow involves researching and developing policy solutions to increase economic opportunity and decreasing work inequality. Since 2019, Dr. Cougar has focused heavily on researching ways to reform unemployment. I'm informed that you're a recent new resident of Maryland, and that's the reason you're going first.
Thank you, Chairman Senator Cardin, and Ranking Member Senator Paul, and members of the committee. It's an honor to testify before you today about the challenges facing small businesses. My name is Annalise Cougar, and I'm a fellow at Brookings Metro, and my specialties in U.S. workforce policy, inclusive economic development, and global supply chains. This is also a personal topic for me because my father is a small business owner. He owns a lightning rod installation company with 2 or 3 employees, and he has consistently struggled to find and retain quality talent. I believe my father could have really benefited from more management training on how to more effectively manage his teams and reach out to pools of talent that he couldn't find. But for the last 30 or 40 years, we've had a very lean approach to supporting small business ecosystems. And this, in a normal time, looks like a Darwinian survival of the fittest. But in the pandemic, it quickly devolved into a Squid Game scenario. And the carnage was all around us. The temporary relief that was provided helped avoid some of the worst effects of this carnage and helped to prevent this from cascading into the rest of the economy. But today, small businesses, as you've both noted, really face major challenges with workforce as a massive pain point. And I believe we need to do more to think about how we can support a vital ecosystem. So what's causing this pain? I would argue that it's actually a complex, perfect storm of factors, some of which were pandemic-related, but some are actually longer-term trends. The pandemic trends, including immigration, lack of childcare, actually 256,000 Americans of prime working age passed away from COVID, so there's those workers that we unfortunately no longer have. Also, the reallocation that happened as things like hospitality completely collapsed, and then there was massive growth in things like warehousing. That reallocation of workers and matching employers, there's a lot of friction there, and it takes a lot of time to resolve. But there are also much more long-term shifts, which include demographic shifts, such as an aging workforce. The pandemic actually accelerated the retirement of many baby boomers. And the younger generation of workers is not only a smaller pool, but it's a much more diverse pool. Historically, we have underinvested in Black and Latino or Hispanic talent, and they have had less access to quality jobs and higher education. In addition, the digital age is going to create an ongoing need to keep people fresh, not just workers, but also managers and manager training. And this is really costly for employers to bear as well. So what should we do about this? I think in the short term, expanding immigration and including work visas, but also helping employers understand, like extension services, to help them understand how they can reach talent that's on the sidelines, like the long-term unemployed, people with disabilities, people who are formerly incarcerated. That's something we can do. But I think in the long run, we need to think about 3 things. 1, employers in the digital age need to shift from being just consumers of talent to also co-producers of talent. So we've done some studies in my previous job on incentives to small, medium-sized, and large businesses to train their workers where they would be reimbursed for their training. What we found was that there's a sweet spot for medium size in particular, 18 to 100, We're investing in their training and subsidizing that leads to greater revenue and greater employment. But for small businesses, they were actually harmed by these subsidies. And so I believe we also need to think about things like pooling costs and sharing training costs, which happens in some of the most mature systems where you have applied training. Finally, I think we really do need to expand that management and supervisory training and manufacturing extension to many more industries, such as the service sector. Number two, we need to rethink our talent model from programs. We have 43 across 9 federal agencies, often duplicating efforts, to more of a systems approach. A systems approach is what small businesses can participate and act part of. They cannot create their own bespoke training programs. They just can't afford it. Things like apprenticeships happen in a system in countries that do it the best. And finally, diversity inclusion is not about charity. If we fail to engage the talent, our diverse talent that make up not just workers but also entrepreneurs, if we fail to get them off the sidelines and into our economy, we will fail to innovate. We will fail to have regions that are vital. And moreover, we will fail to really have an American dream in this country anymore, where there's a level playing field for people that don't have wealth to access it. My father is approaching 70 next fall, and he's confided in me that he doesn't think he can retire fully. He's never had, for most of his adult life, he hasn't had health insurance, even though he stands on roofs all day. I think really if we're going to think about creating the vibrant ecosystem that we need in this country to compete with China and other countries, we need to think more about creating that level playing field and investing in our diverse talent. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next witness is Rachel Grizzler. She's a senior research fellow at Heritage Foundation, focusing on retirement and labor policies such as Social Security, disability insurance, pensions, and workers' compensation. Her work focuses on policies that promote economic growth, individual freedom, and well-being. Before joining Heritage in 2013, Ms. Grizzler was a senior economist on the staff of the Joint Economic Committee of the Congress. That's good pedigree coming from Congress. Glad to hear from you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Small businesses continue to struggle to find workers who are willing to work and who have the skills that they need. In fact, employers listed labor quality as their single most important problem every month between 2018 and 2021, with the exception of March and April of 2020 with the COVID shutdowns. These struggles have gotten worse since the labor shortage. The current 11.4 million job openings equates to 1.9 jobs available for everyone that's looking for work. And yet, small businesses now say that inflation has become an even bigger problem than their workforce struggles, with 32% of small business owners reporting inflation as their single biggest problem. That compares to 3% in January 2021. 40-year high inflation has created many struggles for businesses. Surging input costs mean that contracts come in over budget, sometimes even at a loss. Employers have to increase workers' pay to keep up with rising consumer costs and to compete in a labor force that's now 3.2 million below its pre-pandemic rate. But this creates an inflationary cycle. When businesses have to pay workers more to do the exact same thing, they have to raise their prices. In April alone, 70% of businesses said that they increased their pay or they plan to increase it, at the same time that 63% of businesses increased their prices. Higher wages haven't made workers better off, though. The median worker has experienced a $3,300 wage increase over the past year, but inflation has eaten away that entire gain and actually left them $1,600 poorer. So what is driving inflation? The federal government's policies. Inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods. And the federal government has simultaneously pumped trillions of dollars into the economy while restricting the supply of goods and services through policies that discourage or outright prohibit work. The federal government spent 45% more in both 2020 and 2021 than it did in 2019. And all of this is deficit financed. About half of it came from the Federal Reserve printing money. The money supply has increased more over the past 2 years than it did over the prior 10. Most problematic was the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan that was enacted well after the recovery was underway, and which included less than 10% going towards actual public health. The bulk of the American Rescue Plan was welfare expansions that exacerbated the labor shortage, private union bailouts that incentivized reckless behavior, giveaways to state and local governments that were already abundant in revenues, and $1,400 stimulus checks that fueled the inflation that's since eaten away their entire value. The administration's proposed solutions to spend more and produce less are backwards. Things like forgiving college loan debts owed by the most affluent Americans, enacting a child care entitlement that would drive up costs and crowd out providers, and taxing away the output and the innovation of the most productive parts of our economy will lead to something that's even worse than inflation. We'll have stagflation. Moreover, when it comes to the unprecedented worker shortage and the workforce skill gaps, the government is the problem and not the solution. The government has effectively put up roadblocks on all of the most efficient roadways to a more productive and robust economy, and instead is directing traffic onto a congested toll road. Ongoing welfare without work benefits, including Obamacare expansions and SNAP expansions, are continuing to discourage work, particularly among young people. And federal COVID-19 vaccine mandates have made the healthcare workforce shortage especially pronounced, even life-threatening, with healthcare employment lagging total employment by 263,000 jobs just since the mandates went into effect. Higher education subsidies and the administration's cancellation of thriving new apprenticeship programs are preventing people from pursuing lower cost and higher quality education. And federal job training programs have been failures. The WIOA program is supposed to provide training for in-demand careers, but a gold standard study found that only 1 out of 3 participants found jobs in their field of training. Politicians and bureaucrats can't know businesses' needs better than employers themselves. So they should stop diverting people into programs that waste their time and taxpayers' money when private sector employers can and are providing more effective education and training. While the temptation for policymakers is always to do something, the best solution to fighting inflation and improving the workforce is to interfere less. Instead of building an expensive new highway, policymakers should simply remove the roadblocks that are preventing people from getting where they need to go in the shortest time and at the lowest cost. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Our next witness is John Meyer, who is well-known in our committee. He's a frequent visitor. He's the founder and CEO of the Small Business Majority, a national organization focused on uplifting small businesses across the country while ensuring a diverse and inclusive economy. He works with the Small Business Administration and has led to the organization providing resources to 30 million small businesses and entrepreneurs. He previously testified in front of Congress and has worked alongside the White House to solve issues facing small businesses and the economy. Glad to hear from you.
Thank you, Chairman Cardin, Ranking Member Paul, and members of the committee. I founded Small Business Majority 16 years ago to empower America's diverse entrepreneurs to build a thriving and equitable economy. We have a network of over 85,000 small businesses and 1,500 partners or partner organizations we work with. Before founding Small Business Majority, I was the founder and CEO of ACI Interactive, an award-winning interactive communications company. So I've had a front row seat for challenges that workforce challenges faced by small businesses. The Great Resignation has spawned record numbers of new businesses, which is great. However, it's exacerbated workforce challenges. Small business owners have overwhelmingly cited labor shortages as one of the most significant challenges they face. According to a recent survey from Goldman Sachs, 87% of small firms report difficulties filling open positions. Our own polling has revealed that more than half of small business owners reported being negatively impacted by workforce shortages. Small businesses are doing what they can to address these problems. According to our polling, small businesses have taken measures to create more incentives for workers, such as increasing pay, increasing benefits, creating more part-time positions, and hiring younger staff. However, as emergency financial assistance has expired and additional support remains stymied by partisan politics, small firms await the resources they need to sustain a long-term recovery. A leading workforce barrier faced by small businesses is the ability to offer quality, affordable benefits commensurate with those offered by large firms. Since 2014, the Affordable Care Act has been an essential component of the small business ecosystem. Indeed, more than half of the ACA market participants are small business owners, small business employees, and self-employed Americans. The American Rescue Plan has helped to fill the coverage gap by expanded tax credits. However, if Congress fails to extend these benefits, those who work in small businesses will find it difficult to maintain health care coverage commensurate with that offered by large firms. Similarly, many small businesses do not have the resources to offer paid leave benefits the way large companies do, and are looking to the federal government to step in with the kind of paid leave programs that exist in every other developed country in the world. Likewise, access to quality, affordable child care is essential if we're to address workforce instability. Women in particular have been forced out of the labor pool due to the lack of access to affordable child care during the pandemic. More than 1/3 of small business owners with children reported that a lack of access to affordable, high-quality child care was a barrier to starting their businesses and hiring employees. Congress must expand tax credits for child care expenses that would allow working parents to receive a percentage of child care expenses as a tax refund. The pandemic has highlighted the importance of wealth building, including saving for retirement. Unfortunately, many small businesses do not have the resources or the administrative capability to offer retirement benefits. We must expand state secure choice programs that provide an easy on-ramp for employees to save for retirement while ensuring that self-employed individuals have access. I also want to touch on two essential workforce pools that we are underutilizing. The first is immigrants. Immigrants are highly entrepreneurial, launching small businesses at over twice the rate of native-born Americans. Moreover, throughout our history, immigrants have filled essential labor needs. We must pass comprehensive immigration reform. Alongside that, we must expand the H-1B visa program to allow more visas for skilled and low-skilled foreign workers while decreasing the waiting period for rejected applicants. Also, justice-impacted individuals that the chairman referenced. Second chance hiring opens an enormous untapped talent pool for small employers. Research has shown, and anecdotal evidence in our own network, that most employers hiring justice-impacted individuals have positive experiences and notably lower turnover rates. Some of the tools and resources needed include occupational licensing reform, implementing clean slate procedures, and creating materials that will educate small businesses on the benefits of second chance hiring. Finally, as has been discussed here, we must invest more in helping small businesses access the resources they need to train a skilled workforce. An example of this is the Lifetime Learning and Training Account Act that was reintroduced earlier this year. To conclude, more than 2 years into the pandemic, small businesses are slowly rebuilding, but they need a vibrant, stable workforce to fully recover. I look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Our final witness is Dr. Michael Falkender, who's the Dean's Professor of Finance at the Maryland Smith. He joined the University of Maryland in 2008, and I'm sure everybody here knows University of Maryland is the home of the national champion men lacrosse undefeated season. You all knew that. It was never in doubt. Dr. Falkender left that role at the beginning of 2019 to serve as the Assistant Secretary of Economic Policy at the U.S. Department of Treasury. During the COVID-19 pandemic, he assisted in negotiating the CARES Act and was the senior Treasury official who led to the implementation of the Paycheck Protection Program. And I remember being in rooms with our witness as we were trying to implement this program.
Thank you, Chairman Cardin, Ranking Member Paul, and Senators on the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today on the challenges America's small businesses are confronting as they look to meet their workforce needs. As the Chairman said, I'm a finance professor at the University of Maryland. I also serve on the advisory board of the Maryland Small Business Development Center, and I'm a visiting fellow at the America First Policy Institute. During the Trump administration, I had the honor of serving as the Assistant Secretary for Economic Policy at the Department of Treasury. In that role, I worked very closely with this committee and the Small Business Administration to quickly implement the Paycheck Protection Program. As a result of our exceptionally strong partnership, the unemployment rate peaked at just 14.7% in April of 2020. My co-authors and I estimate that the first round of PPP likely saved as many as 17 million Americans from the unemployment rolls. The situation today, however, is very different from the depths of the pandemic. The current challenges confronting our economy are largely the result of overstimulation, particularly the American Rescue Plan. Excessive federal spending has buoyed consumer demand, which has resulted in businesses struggling to find enough American workers to meet that demand. Absent sufficient supply, prices are rising at a pace not seen in 40 years. According to the National Federation of Independent Businesses' April 2022 report, quote, 32% of small business owners report inflation as their single most important problem in operating their business, the highest reading since the fourth quarter of 1980, end quote. While the Federal Reserve has belatedly started raising interest rates to curb inflation, policymakers must also focus on ways that we can increase the supply of available workers. To be clear, the pace of jobs recovery from the depths of the pandemic has been impressive, largely as a result of vaccines generated by the Trump administration's Operation Warp Speed. We have already recovered more than 96% of the 22 million jobs lost from the pandemic recession. For context, it took more than 6 years to fully recover the jobs lost during the 2008 financial crisis. That said, we are still 822,000 jobs short of where unemployment was in February 2020, even though our population has grown by nearly 4 million. While the unemployment rate is low, labor force participation is still more than 1% below pre-pandemic levels. At the same time, households are flush with cash due to the $4.6 trillion in total COVID resources authorized by Congress. With all of that cash boosting demand, the employment needs of our nation's businesses have expanded. The result is more than 11.4 million job openings at the end of April, just below the record set in March. Today, there are nearly 2 job openings for every 1 employed person. America's small businesses are struggling to fully serve their customers' needs. According to data from ADP, while large and medium-sized enterprises continue to grow, employment at firms of fewer than 50 employees has declined this year. Looking at the April survey of small business owners, quote, 59% reported hiring or trying to hire in April, and 93% of those reported few or no qualified applicants for the positions they were trying to fill, end quote. The fundamental problem is that we have a labor shortage. Our focus should be on implementing policies that will bolster supply, including increasing the size of the domestic labor force across the skills distribution. First, we must stop providing prime-age, able-bodied adults excessive amounts of cash payments and social services detached from work requirements. The Biden administration has proposed eliminating work requirements from eligibility for child tax credits and has opposed recent state-requested Medicaid waivers that have work requirements. Recent work authored by researchers at the University of Chicago examined the child tax credit proposal and estimates that, quote, this change in policy would lead to 1.5 million workers to exit the labor force, end quote. Second, we should reduce the regulations associated with obtaining the training and experience that workers need. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation estimates that, quote, small businesses pay on average $11,700 per year per employee in regulatory costs, and the cost of regulation to small businesses with 50 employees or less are nearly 20% higher than for the average firm, end quote. Examples to reduce these regulations include ensuring that the Department of Labor does not micromanage apprenticeship programs and by eliminating the excessive occupational licensing requirements that many states have imposed. Further interference by the federal government is not the solution. There are already too many overlapping state and federal job training programs that do not provide the skills employers are looking for. Third, we should re-examine the work disincentives in Social Security. Full retirement age has risen over time from 65 to nearly 67, but early benefits start at age 62. Those benefits are subject to reduction if people work. For example, somebody aged 64 who has started taking benefits but makes $30,000 from working would see their Social Security benefit reduced by more than $5,000. The current Social Security structure tends to disencourage Americans from continuing to work at our time that our labor force is too small. Finally, our immigration system should be more skills and merit-based. The current high-skilled visa program needs to be reformed so that we are selecting those that possess the highest skills needed to grow our economy. I look forward to participating in this important conversation. Thank you.
Again, let me thank all four of our witnesses. We'll now start 5-minute rounds. Before the pandemic, we had hearings in this committee, and the challenges for small business getting trained workers was one of the top 3 issues mentioned as concerns for small businesses and growth. So we had a significant challenge for small businesses getting quality trained workers. When we created the Paycheck Protection Program during the early parts of COVID-19, one of the main objectives was to allow small companies to be able to maintain their workforce, because if we knew they had to lay them off, it'd be more challenging to bring that workforce back, because small businesses would be, again, at a disadvantage in getting the most trained workers. So we recognize this issue. Now, the pandemic has made it worse. The labor shortage today has made it much worse. I'll give you one example, though, in regards to government programs. We have surveys from the National Restaurant Association about the challenges restaurants are having in being able to attract workers with the current labor market and the cost of labor. And those that receive the restaurant revitalization funds are in a position where they can keep their workforce, they can get the workers. Those who did not receive it are having a much more difficult time competing. Just mentioning the fact that there is an affordability issue here in addition to finding trained workers. But several of you have mentioned that small businesses don't really have the capacity to be able to have a training program. They don't have that. You have to have a shared efforts. We have lots of training programs at the national level. I am familiar with some of the apprenticeship programs, but it's difficult for a small business to get engaged in an apprenticeship program. If you're a large company, you have a much easier time connecting with those that have the apprenticeship programs. So, Dr. Goger, let me start with you. How can we tailor these training programs so that small businesses can really be engaged as a partner to be able to get a trained worker to meet their needs?
That's a great question, Senator Cardin. The issue, like I said, is that we have programs and not systems. And so that means if you look at the gold standard places where these earn and learn ecosystems work well, you have a clear role of the education provider that takes some of that training burden off the employer. You have a clear role often of an intermediary that helps connect the learner, the employer, right? And then you have employers that have a clear role, which is to engage in a longer-term strategy of training up professional, right? So we often treat apprenticeships like they are these bespoke programs. And the issue with that is, like, if I ask my dad, why don't you start an apprenticeship, which I have, the answer is, well, in lightning rods, he doesn't have a curricula for that. He doesn't have a registration. He can't access that registration process. It's super cumbersome for him. What if we had a mechanism where all the other lightning rod providers could get together and work with educators to build that competency-based pathway, and then he participates in that? On the job, he trains to that structured pathway. They all agree, and periodically they reassess that process. It takes the burden of creating that whole thing from scratch off of his shoulders. And in the long run, once it's all set up, you have an upfront investment, a public sector investment, but in places like Switzerland, employers get an 8 to 11% return on investment. And that's because some of those heavier costs around who does the educating and all that, that's not on the small business's shoulders. So I think that business model is really critical to thinking about, and I also think the cumbersome nature of our registration process, we don't have connections between apprenticeship, CTE, community colleges. These are all separate silos instead of a unified system that employers can engage in.
Mr. Ahrensmeyer, let me ask you, what would you like to see Congress do to make it easier for small businesses to be able to access training programs, to be able to get trained workers?
Well, I think Dr. Gover said, and the literature all shows that these programs, they work well when you're dealing with big companies, but like everything else in the small business world, small businesses don't have the capability to navigate, complicated bureaucracies. They don't have the time to independently pursue whether it's connections with community colleges, directly with training programs, and we need to consolidate these programs, and we need to improve the education and information is provided to small businesses about how to access these programs. I think sometimes the programs are, if they're sort of looking to get the biggest numbers of impact, they're going to go to a big business. They're going to be able to deal with one HR department, and they're going to be able to get those numbers, but it doesn't solve the problem of the many small businesses out there. So I think it's a question of streamlining a system and making it accessible to small businesses.
Thank you. Senator Paul?
I'm going to reserve my time and pass it down to another member on my side. If I could.
Certainly. That would be, I think it's Senator Inhofe.
It is. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's no state that's more dependent upon the issues that are brought up in this committee hearing. This is the reason I got on in the first place. I hear regularly from small businesses in Oklahoma because we've got a lot of them. Their margins are shrinking. I think we can speculate as to why, and it's pretty obvious. In April, inflation was up 8.3%, and the average American family is spending an extra $569 every month just to buy basic necessities. And on top of this, businesses everywhere are raising wages and offering more benefits simply to survive in the labor market, but it's still not enough. So, Ms. Grizzler, is that right? Yeah, I'd like to have you. Right now, we're undergoing this multi-trillion-dollar spending spree, and the effect that has on small businesses is debatable. You touched on this in your opening statement, but I'd like to have you elaborate as you wish.
Yes, so the spending spree has resulted in $1 out of every $3 that's in circulation today having been printed by the government. That has massively expanded the amount of demand in the economy. And at the same time, we had welfare without work benefits that were restricting the supply of workers. And so it just created this huge gap. The result of that, businesses can't get the workers, and they're in this inflationary cycle here. We have to stop the spending immediately. That is one of the first things. And then I think we get towards the longer term goals because workforce has been an issue for years, and we have, in many ways, a broken higher education market.
Yeah, the spending is something I wanted to get to because that's something that is not talked about as much. And I would say to Dr. Falkender, very similarly, and you touched on this in your opening remarks, but how can this administration advocate policies? Obviously, they're not doing it right now that would help level the playing field for small businesses.
Thank you, Senator. I think some of the most important things that we can do is reduce, as was stated, some of the spending, but also some of the regulation that's being imposed on small businesses. Organizations that are operating at smaller scale but nevertheless have the same regulatory requirements have fewer workers to spread those costs over. It makes it more expensive per worker. And as a result, we're seeing that small businesses are struggling more than others to retain workers. Likewise, as the chairman mentioned, larger businesses have greater ease in providing telework, for instance, for their employers. And so anything we can do to make the environment for small businesses more competitive by reducing some of the costs that we impose upon them and some of the threats of higher taxation that we're imposing upon them would be beneficial to assist small businesses. But more than anything, we need to increase the number of workers in the workforce. There just aren't enough people that are looking for jobs relative to the number of openings right now. And so reducing the disincentives of being part of the workforce, I think, is the singular most important thing that we can do to help fill those employment gaps.
it's kind of interesting because I'm older than any of you guys are, and I can remember it wasn't that long ago when we thought we'd love to have a problem like this someday. Now it's here, and we're not so sure about it. But I think it needs to be said over and over again by knowledgeable people, such as we have here today, on this overspending, overregulation, the damage that is being done. And I appreciate your witnessing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate its importance of having someone on the panel who has a family experience with lightning rods, because I think it's fair to say that Senator Paul sometimes acts as a lightning rod, and it's frequently said that I act as a lightning rod. So I think it's appropriate in some important way. I was in Colorado last week and met with a group of students in one of our mountain towns to discuss the success of a program I started when I was governor called CareerWise, which is an apprenticeship program. And one of the students, his name was Brandon, and he'd worked for the previous 3 years as he was working his way through high school with a construction company. And he'd actually decided he's going to go to college. He wasn't going to, but now he's going to go to college. But he's going to continue working for the construction company. He's a project supervisor at the age of 19. Anyway, he's going to continue working for them as he goes through a degree in architecture. He made a challenge to us: is what are you going to do to make sure every kid has a chance to get meaningful work experience while they're still in school, before they actually go out and get a job? So his challenge was, what are you going to do to get every kid this opportunity? So what more can the federal government, now, Dr. Goger, I'll start with you. What more can federal government do to pair small businesses and younger Americans with these kind of experiential learning opportunities?
That's a great question, Senator Hickenlooper. And really, we need to start much younger. We need to start in K-12. We should be taking 11-year-olds to meet mentors, because information asymmetries about what you can do in your job are huge. People don't know. Jasmine Hill, a professor at UCLA, she calls it mobility knowledge. They don't know what the options are. There are so many well-paying jobs that aren't being filled purely because people don't have someone in their family that works there and therefore can tell them how to access it, right? So as the first in my family to go to college, there was a lot of that mobility knowledge that I didn't have. And I think we need to be taking a more proactive role going into schools and in K-12 curricula, starting early with opportunities to get work experience, right? Our average apprenticeship age is 26. We should be thinking about 16. That's where our young talent really is. And I think one of the things, if you want to get to specifics, one of the things that we really need to think about is when guidance counselors and teachers, what do they know about the career opportunities available to young people? A lot of times, be a lawyer, be a doctor, go to college. That's pretty much all people hear. But I think there's a lot more options for the 2/3 of Americans that don't end up with a college degree. Second, we need some permanent funding streams for intermediaries that do that connection, like CareerWise, between the young person, the employer, and that can provide some support. Let's say the young person needs transportation. That's the connector that we don't have permanent funding for. 3, we need funding for related instruction, right? So if you're going to have someone learning that class, ideally you have some time in the classroom and some time on the job. It's a structured program. In the classroom, you learn, if it's an electrical program, you learn the theories around like nodes of electricity, right? But on the job, you figure out how to actually solve the problem. And that's where the soft skills get built. That's where someone builds that professional network. So I think that we need to really make sure that we're structuring the incentives in K-12 and community colleges so that education itself is creating multiple pathways for people and not just a college-for-all solution. Because you said an apprenticeship doesn't have to be a choice between a degree or not. In Alabama, they actually created the nation's first master's degree apprenticeship in social work in an HBCU.
Yeah, and I agree with that completely. There doesn't have to be that match. I think it is also worth looking at how do we keep this skills learning going throughout a person's life. Kids of all ages are going to have to keep learning things. There's a young woman in Colorado who started a company called Guild that now is that interface between some of her customers are Starbucks and Walmart, where every single employee, when they want to pick up any packet of learning skills, the company will support them, and then Guild is the intermediary that allows them to make sure they get the right class and they finish it. If I can just get 30 seconds, I wanted to ask a little bit just about the visa application process, Mr. Ernst Meyer. Just because I see so much of this workforce, I mean, if we had a streamlined visa process, I think that could go a long way. A lot of these places where we have real workforce I was a small business person myself, so I'm painfully aware of the importance of this.
Well, it's absolutely true. I mean, some industries like the hospitality industry, the construction industry rely heavily on foreign-born labor. And along those lines, it's absolutely true. We need to increase the H-1B visa program for high-skilled workers, but we need to expand it to low-skilled as well. Talking to small business owners across the country, they are lacking workers at every level. Right. As I said, construction, hospitality, and other industries. So, you know, we've grown our economy over the decades, over the centuries, with foreign-born workers, and we have constraints on that right now. And we are hearing from businesses across industries that is a huge problem. So we need to you know, responsibly ease some of those restrictions.
Well, maybe the next thing we'll have a hearing on comprehensive immigration reform and work from that point of view. Anyway, thank you. I yield back. Thank you for being concise.
I just wanted to interject on the immigration issue just very quickly. Well, here's the thing is we never do anything on immigration, and the reason is people want the whole thing done or nothing. If you would break it into small pieces and look at the H-2A program, the H-2B program, or the employment-based visa program, there are fixes that both sides could come together. But the big thing is, you know, there's 20 million people here illegally. One side wants them to vote. The other side doesn't think immediately voting is a great idea if you came here illegally. That's a big bugaboo, and it is stifled us. I have a bill that doubles the employment-based visas. There's 1 through 5, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to get bipartisan support on that and pass a bill. There's 70,000 employment-based visas, EB 1 through 5. I have a bill to double it. I think a lot of Democrats would support that, but it's not gotten anywhere because everybody wants everything or nothing. I have another bill that takes the H-2A program, and the H-2B are another category. They're capped, but H-2A is agriculture, it's uncapped. I'd take some of the H-2B workers, put them in the H-2A, the uncapped, which would give us more workers, and they would now be called H-2A. It would be mostly like landscape workers, but it'd be probably several 100,000 landscape workers. You'd move them over. And I think there could be bipartisan support for that, too. We take the H-2A program and make it work better by making the government respond to you within a certain amount of days. It's electronic. If you're bringing back the same workers, there's less work, and they run through the system much easier. We make it year-round. All these things are very practical that there was probably no partisan disagreement on. Not everybody's going to vote for it, but it's not a really, really pitched partisan battle. But we don't get to it because the sticking point is, do we let 20 million people vote or 15 million people vote who came illegally? So I think if we got to smaller portions of this, we might have a chance. And I'll go back to the regular order and just.
Right. We might differ a little bit the way you explained it, but I do agree that but I do agree we need to make progress. Senator Ernst.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Paul. Bugaboo. That's the word for the day, folks. But I do want to chime in on some of the thoughts that have been expressed by our witnesses today, and thank you all so much. And Dr. Goger, I'm going to agree about a phrase that I use all the time. It's you only know what you know, right? So we experience this throughout our population. You only know what you know, and you do need those examples out there. I am the first in my family to get a 4-year degree. My sister has a degree from community college, and my brother is he did not go to school, and that's probably a good thing. But he's doing quite well because he had skilled training in heavy equipment, and he went directly into the workforce. He works for, he's a union laborer with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe rail line, and he operates heavy equipment for them. And out of all the three of us kids, he probably does the best. So there are just different types of opportunities for different individuals out there, but you're right. You only know what you know. And so to that, Dr. Falkender, thank you so much for being here. I would like to say thank you because I do think we need to get more engagement in the workforce, and finding ways to do that is extremely important for so many small businesses that are really struggling. Some of them are closing their doors because they don't have workers. So we really have to do something about that. And federal apprenticeship and job training programs they exist in abundance, as you pointed out. I have actually worked for one of those job training programs at a technical college in South Carolina, but there are so many of them. So how can we put reforms in place, do a better job of maintaining those programs, getting the types of skills out there? What reforms would you recommend?
I think first and foremost, we need to make them significantly more flexible. You know, one of the things that I learned during the pandemic and running the Paycheck Protection Program is that we may think of businesses as operating a particular way, but when you're then rolling out a program nationwide, you're exposed to the diversity of businesses out there and the different situations they confront. And the idea that we can create this one-size-fits-all and have it work for everybody just doesn't work if you start putting lots of constraints in place. We need to let businesses, states, municipalities have the flexibility to do it for themselves. And so, for instance, when you have the Department of Labor put a lot of conditions on apprenticeship programs that then disqualify them from participation, that's going to make it more difficult for industries and businesses to find ways that work for them in their unique circumstances. So let's provide flexibility and otherwise get out of the way.
Mm-hmm. And I agree 100%. And I am going to tout a program that I visited last week while we were on recess. I visited the John V. Hansen Career Center in Forest City, Iowa. It is a career center that is sponsored by the local community college and 4 of the high schools, and obviously a very generous employer in the area. It didn't take the federal government to come up with this career center, and it is very focused on the needs of local employers. And it allows juniors and seniors to go to the career center during their regular K through 12 school time, and they are learning a trade and getting college credit at the same time through the community college. And these young men and women, they can either decide to continue on and transfer credits into a university, go on to the community college, or some of them are even being presented with job opportunities from local employers coming directly out of high school, debt-free, great paying jobs. So I always hesitate to say we're from the federal government, we're here to help, because sometimes we just need to get out of the way and let those local decision makers, those local thought providers get in there, discover what is necessary and right for their own community, and drive forward with it. And that's what the John V. Hansen Center has done. So I appreciate it. This is a really good discussion today. So thank you all very much for being here. Thank you.
Senator Rosen.
Well, thank you, Chairman Cardin, Ranking Member Paul. This is a really good hearing. Workforce challenges, it's what we heard this before the pandemic, we're hearing it during, and now hopefully as we're moving through it, we're going to find some resolve. I want to say that I agree 110% with everyone here who says we have to get down through K through 12. We have to excite young kids, show them that there's more than 3 jobs that they might see on TV or the internet, how they get there, and what the path is for them, and really empower those career counselors and all of those things in each one of our communities. And so we've spoken about training and mentoring for young folks, but we also have to talk about upskilling or reskilling our returning workforce. are midlife, perhaps, workers. And so Help Wanted is a sign we've seen in every window on the doors of small business over the past year. We hear from companies of every size, and we're just facing unprecedented challenges filling the workforce. So in Nevada, even though the unemployment rate has continued to go down, only 3 in 5 adults are working or currently actively seeking work. And so the rest have grown discouraged. They've dropped out of the labor market, and quite a few have stayed at home to take care of their families, maybe children, maybe a aging parent as a caregiver. And so I felt that we had to create an on-ramp for those who want to join the workforce at that time. So I introduced what's called the STEM Restart Act. It's bipartisan legislation to help Americans come back through what we're calling returnships. So Dr. Goger and then Dr. Meyer, how do you think we can create on-ramps for these mid-career workers so we can get them upskilled or reskilled and return to the workforce and help them in that way? A little different than our young kids, K through 12.
Sure.
Please.
I think that most training that happens by employers, and we should be incentivizing, especially mid-sized employers, to train and onboard workers more. When we did a study in California, we found that 18 to 100 was the sweet spot where when you reimburse employers to train, that increased their revenue and increased their size. For smaller employers, though, I think we need to think about how you can pool training costs like community training centers, incubators, places where people know where to go when they are looking for that new job and they don't know where to start.
Thank you.
Well, I think if there's a whole panoply of things that are in effect here. For women reentering the workforce, childcare continues to, maybe they've stayed at home with the kids are off in school, but they still are going to need childcare. And we hear constantly from employers that they struggle to keep and recruit women, particularly caregivers, because of the inability to access affordable childcare. So the provisions in the Build Back Better Act to really reduce the cost of childcare are absolutely essential. We've talked about expanding opportunities for foreign-born workers in the system, justice-impacted returning citizens in the system. And quite frankly, if you're recruiting someone back into your small business, you've got to be able to pay the same level of benefits that a big business will if in the competition. And so it's sort of the big four areas that we think are important: healthcare, paid leave, childcare, what we talked about, and retirement savings, and really facilitating small businesses being able to offer commensurate benefits. It's just a huge disparity across our system. So it's no one thing, it's really putting all of these together.
Thank you. I know I have a few seconds left, so I just really want to reiterate what we've been talking about apprenticeships. Also, because in Nevada, we have over 90 registered apprenticeships where you earn while you learn, you graduate debt-free. Average salary there about $70,000. We're trying to bring more apprenticeships. We have large swaths of openings in cybersecurity and technical computing, forensics, a lot of those things. Trying to bring more of that registered apprenticeship capacity, because we know that works. And I just wanted to, like I said, in the few seconds left, to say how much I agree with that, and I know that you're supportive of that, and I think it's important that we put our efforts into this to create a robust workforce. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Paul.
We've discussed a little bit of labor force shortages, and I'm a Republican who is for more lawful immigration, so I think that can be part of the answer. I do think there are certain aspects of the labor force shortage, though, that are perplexing. The argument's been made that the artificial stimulus of government spending and the creation of new money by the Federal Reserve is part of it. It's created this enormous amount of demand, and that's part of labor force shortage. The only problem with that argument is we still haven't got back to the actual physical number of where we were before the pandemic. Now, the government did really disrupt. We've never had a $20 trillion economy just closed and then reopened. So there's enormous dislocations. It's not only ours, with most of the world closed down, then reopened. But the other argument is that maybe it's an underuse, or that maybe we've deterred people from work. And quantifying those and making arguments for which is the case, that we have so much artificial demand that we just can't keep up with the workers because of the artificial demand, versus a labor force that's not working. So we have labor force participation that's about 62% or so, and people say it's going down. The remaining 38% I'm interested in, does that include people that are disabled or can't work? Or when you do labor force participation, we'll start with Ms. Grizzler. Are those people able to work, the 38% that are not in the labor force? 62% are participating, 38 aren't. Who are the 38%?
Yes, it can include those people that are not in the labor force. Part of that could be disability. Most of them are able to work. I've been digging into the numbers and trying to figure out who is it that is not coming back to the labor force. A particularly troubling part is that it seems to be the 20 to 24-year-old age group. The drop in employment is actually bigger than the net drop in employment for all workers. That's when people should be at their greatest opportunity. Like, they can have all the potential in the world there, and they're not attending college in greater degree either. The college enrollment rates have declined. So that's a particularly troubling part of it. A narrative that is out there is that it's mostly women, especially women with younger children, who have been disproportionately impacted. And absolutely, childcare is a struggle. I have 6 young kids and went through COVID, and it was not easy to work with them all at home many times. But there have been some studies, multiple ones, including by Jason Furman, President Obama's former CEA chair, Claudia Golden, and they basically found, yes, it was a struggle, but women pushed through, and it actually did not cause their employment to decline. I've been looking at this, and only 16% of the current gap in employment is parents with children. That includes men and women. And so I don't think that that is the big part there, and we don't need to be enacting a big new entitlement that would drive up those costs of childcare, but there are ways that we can help childcare become more accessible and affordable, and also have the types of jobs that work for women, that work for caregivers, that work for people at the older end of the age spectrum, that are particularly appealing to younger workers, and that's the independent contracting, the freelancing. We should not be shutting those opportunities out.
Did you say you have 6 young children?
Well, 4 to 14, so if you consider them all young.
6. Yeah, my sister has 6. She's an OBGYN, so I know what it's like to have a working sister with 6 also, so that's a big deal. You know, when you look at this also, one of the things we talked about was, you know, we were quite concerned, at least on our side, of adding the $600 extra in unemployment. And that expired back in September, and we thought, well, people will go back to work. And the worrisome thing is did we change behavior so much that some of them didn't go back to work? Are some of them working for cash on the side? Are they taking government money and working on the side? And you do hear stories of that, the people who are taking a little bit less from the government than they're driving somewhere for cash, you know, in another city or something, not being reported. Mr. Falkender, or Dr. Falkender, your response sort of to the previous question, labor shortage in general, getting rid of the unemployment add-on, and why we still have a shortage.
Right. So the other significant segment of missing workers are those in their 60s. So there is a early retirement that's going on, and this is why potentially some of the penalties of Social Security should perhaps be revisited, because that's also a significant portion of the missing segment of the labor force. So the technical answer to your question is we can look at different segments of the adult population, and prime labor force participation has mostly come back. It's still only about a 0.5 percentage point below where it was prior to the pandemic. It's the older workers, so prime is 25 to 54. It's above that where we're seeing not a recovery. And so how much of that is extra concern about COVID versus how much of it is the savings that they accumulated, the run-up in their retirement portfolio, facilitated them leaving, but also some of the penalties associated with Social Security, associated with taking Social Security and working at the same time. Unfortunately, the high levels of inflation we're seeing may push some of those people back into the labor force, but I don't think that's why we want them back in.
If I could just add that eliminating the retirement earnings test would not cost anything. It's actually just kind of a misperceived tax. You get the money back later on, so it would actually be pro-growth and improve Social Security's finances.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Cardin, Ranking Member Paul. Thank you to our witnesses today. I have heard from a number of businesses up and down my home state, the small state of Delaware, that they are indeed in the middle of a significant labor shortage, but also a skill shortage, and that hiring and retaining and motivating folks who have the appropriate skills for the jobs for which there are opportunities is a real challenge. So thank you. If I could, Dr. Goger, you said in your testimony that apprenticeships should be easier and cheaper for small businesses to sponsor. The apprenticeship model is well known in the building trades and other well-established industries, but my former governor, Jack Markell, launched and ran a statewide program to help create registered apprenticeships in high-growth, high-potential sectors, really driven by employers in partnership with our community college. What barriers do small businesses face in managing a registered apprenticeship program? And do you think government investment in apprenticeships can actually help alleviate this issue?
It's a great question. The challenge for a lot of small businesses, because as I said earlier, we have a program approach that essentially requires an employer to create a bespoke program customized for their business themselves. And instead of creating a system whereby, for example, if in technology, I've done a lot of work on apprenticeship in tech, if you could partner with community training providers and community colleges to provide some of the actual structured education, that takes some of the cost burden off. If you can have some subsidy also up front for the design and training your managers on what is your role here, what is expected of you, and how long this is. I think one of the challenges that we hear from small business is that they tend to think about the costs in the short-term way is that, you know, and I had an intern, right? I had her for 3 months. I spent 2 months trying to train her, and then she had 2 weeks of actually helping me. If I could have kept her longer, then I would have seen that real return of investment coming out. And I think a lot of times there's a mindset issue where employers are seeing these talent investments as a short-term cost and not keeping it long enough to actually see the recoup of that cost. So I think structuring it longer is better for the employer, actually.
I do think that government has a role to play as an aggregator of demand. Most of the small manufacturers, small, medium manufacturers I meet with in Delaware need 4 people with these skills or 6 people with these skills or 10 people with these, but not enough to have them pay the money up front to design and register and run an apprenticeship program long term. I do have a bill, surprise, with Senators Young and Moran and Brown, the apprenticeship hubs across America that would expand the registered apprenticeship model specifically to high growth job market and increase the availability of apprenticeships in a diversity of businesses like high tech, like hospitality, like home health care that don't currently have any registered apprentice programs. Mr. Meyer, in your testimony, you spoke about the need to equip small businesses with workforce training resources. And I think workers ought to have the ability to advance their own skill. And small business employers benefit when workers get the opportunity to improve their skills. Why should government make any investments in skills? I have a bill that would create essentially a tax-preferred savings account with a match up to a modest amount for those who are low and moderate income. Why should government make investments rather than employers in skills training?
I presume you're referring to the Lifetime Learning and Retaining Act. Yeah, I was going to mention that actually because it does allow for government to match savings that employees can put into a fund and use it for when they need to for training. I think it's essential that we, there's a public policy behind making sure we've got a skilled workforce out there, and this is a matching. This is a way that government can leverage its money. It's not 100% it's not covering 100% of the need. It's matching. And look, we do this across our entire economy with tax benefited health care, with tax benefits for retirement savings. So this is really no different. This is the government, strategically using its resources to step in and, in a targeted way, have a positive impact. And
how do you think providing a training opportunity like that would help with retention and morale in the workforce more broadly?
The training, specifically the training is in your bill?
Yep.
Well, it would be, it enables us to have a more stable, skilled workforce that, and then it enables the people who get this training to put themselves into a position to do that job and they do other jobs and increase their responsibilities in the economy. And, you end up with a much more robust workforce by doing that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rono.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So you mentioned the need for childcare, because I think that just as we are having a really hard time finding workers, if we are not providing accessible, affordable childcare, that means that there are a lot of women, especially those who, because of the pandemics, left their work, but they need childcare provisions to get back to work. So can you just tell us a little bit more about any stories about women who, because of lack of childcare, they're not able to get back to the workforce?
Yes, what we've saw is not only were women more likely to be laid off in the pandemic because they're concentrated in frontline jobs, but also, because of school disruptions. Even today, my friend last week, has 2 girls. Her daughter's school was shut down because there was a COVID exposure. So this impacts parents generally, but predominantly women. And I think that it's really challenging for women employed in small businesses like hospitality because they can't really juggle these uncertainties and keep their job. So that's why one of the things that I was talking about is how could you pool funds from small businesses through trade associations and so on, so that you can do things like share some of the costs for childcare, or get small businesses together to reduce health insurance costs, or to be able to offer paid sick leave. I think that structurally small businesses can't afford a lot of these benefits, and that's what's leading them to lose talent to larger companies. And so I see that that is really essential to being able to help women stay and be able to show up in the workplace more regularly, even in the face of ongoing disruptions.
I agree with you that in spite of the testimony that says that government shouldn't be involved, in fact, some of our panelists apparently take the position that the less government does to try to be of help, the worse things are, and I do not agree with that position. So to the extent that a lot of the women in our workforce were in frontline positions, we lost a number of them to COVID, and so I do think that as a developed country, we are very much behind in terms of childcare support and also paid family leave. Those things would help a lot. So with regard to the supply chain, the COVID-related supply chain disruptions have been driving price increases in the U.S., which have disproportionately impacted working and middle-class families. And we know these families are paying more for everyday household goods like groceries, food, rent, utilities, gas. And the Build Back Better included investments to address supply chain vulnerabilities, but it has stalled in the Senate. What kinds of investments should we consider to improve supply chain resiliency in the United States? Do you have any thoughts for you? No, Dr. Grove.
Okay.
Goger. Sorry, Goger.
Yes. This is a really long-running challenge because for 40 years, we've actually incentivized lean supply chains that don't have resilience built in. And so we've disinvested in our domestic manufacturing capacity, including small businesses. We don't have managerial expertise right now in our supply chains to actually respond quickly to changes. And we really need an agile workforce that can learn and change and adapt. And that's why I think employer-provided training is so critical, especially for small and medium-sized businesses that are the source of a lot of the innovation that we see. In many cases, it was small businesses that adapted the most quickly to some of these demand shifts. But I worry that the risks and the costs of all these disruptions will be with us for a really long time unless we can really start to use, really concerted efforts to invest back in building that small business ecosystem and getting some of our diverse talent, and diverse entrepreneurs, their ideas. Some Harvard researchers estimate that if we invested more equally in our talent, we'd quadruple innovation in the United States. We don't have a lack of people or a lack of idea or a lack of talent, but we're keeping people on the sidelines. So how do we remove some of those barriers for innovation?
I think you also mentioned in your testimony that we are not investing equally in Black communities and Hispanic communities, and we are losing out a lot on the talent provided in these communities. I agree with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rono. Once again, I want to thank all four of our witnesses. This has been a very, very helpful panel. Different views, but I think we all recognize the fundamental problem for small business today and access to trained workers and a stable workforce. We've had hearings dealing with the challenges small businesses have with capital, small businesses have with dealing with supply chain disruptions. We had a hearing on that, to deal with the regulatory burdens of small business. But today, we really are concentrating this hearing on the issues concerning labor force. And there's no simple answer to this. I think you all have really given us some really good suggestions. We have programs that deal with job training and apprenticeship, but it's very difficult for a small business to access those programs in a useful way that can be relevant to their current needs. So how do we fine-tune these programs to make sure they're accessible to small businesses? There seems to be a growing consensus, as Senator Paul indicated, on easing the immigration rules, certainly as it relates to worker visas. I would point out that the general immigration policies are just as important. The replenishment of our workforce through normal immigration is important for us to have a supply of workers in this country, not just those that come under the worker visas. And we do need to deal with returning citizens. That's a significant number of people who have been disqualified in so many opportunities that are really able to work, want to work, and can be very reliable workers for themselves and for our economy. And then we get to the issues of affordability to work. You've mentioned that. Not only child care, but health care has been mentioned. These are areas that we have to continue to make sure we have a level playing field for small businesses so that the workers, the businesses are not put at a disadvantage, but the workers are available and can provide the necessary incentives for them to work. One other area that we have not talked about, just put on the table, is our resource partners. We've invested a lot in our resource partners, and they should be able to help provide some of the services to make it easier to connect the dots between the services that are available, but that small businesses don't have the capacity to be able to work through how to get to those services. So I think there's a lot of good suggestions that have come out of this hearing, and I can assure you we'll be following up on this. And once again, we thank you for your being here today, but we're not going to let you off the hook. We expect that we'll be continuing to reach out for your suggestions and your help as we try to help the small business infrastructure in America. With that, if there's no further comments, the committee will stand adjourned. Thanks.